For this week's Preppin data, we're looking at quiz results. So we've got our correct answers up here, and if we take a look at the data structure, then we have our rounds in the rows and the answers to those rounds concatenated together by commas. If we have a look at our participants' answers, then we've got currently our name of each participant and then the rounds as headings. So our first step to kind of get these data sets in more of a similar format would be to pivot our participant answers. So we do a columns to rows pivot, where we do a wildcard pivot, where we're searching for the word round and saying that it starts with round. You could also do contains, same effect, so that we then have our rounds in our rows and those answers in rows as well, as is similar to the correct answers. So now that our data structures are in kind of a similar way, then we're going to union them together, stack them on top of one another, because basically what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to split out our answers for each round, and then we're going to want to pivot those down so that we have a row for each round, for each question, and for each answer. And we're going to want to do that for both our participant answers and our correct answers. So why not union them together so that we can treat them the same and then split them off later once we've sort of done all the cleaning, so we don't have to do it in two separate but identical flows. So we union those two together. We have to do a little bit of, if I show you here, by creating a similar union, we have to tell Tableau Prep what we want to union together. So we can see that initially it incorrectly combines the round here with our round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over here. So to split those up, then we want to right click on that field and say separate aligned field, and we separate off, say, pivot 1, and that separates them out again. So we can select here our pivot 1 names, and we know that that needs to be joined, stacked on top of one another with round. So we hit the little plus here to join those two together, union them together, sorry. And then our, okay, that hasn't worked. So let me just undo that. So our pivot 1 names, our round, well, I'll try it the other way around. Round here, pivot 1 names is what we're trying to get those two stacked together with. There we go, that's worked here. And then similarly, we want our answers and our round 1 to be unioned together. So we select it like that. So that's how we're creating that union of stacking on top the right things. Of course, you could have just renamed the fields so that it would do a similar thing. But the main point here is that we can still separate our correct answers because we have these table names. So that's useful for us going forwards. So we've unioned those together, got these similar things stacking on top of similar things. Now we want to do that splitting up on our answer field. So I mean, there's a bit of renaming going on. So we're basically just going down to here saying split values and automatic split, and that creates all of those lovely fields of our answers. Split all out like so. Now we're ready to do a second pivot where we pivot our answers down into the rows rather than having them as 10 separate columns as they currently are. So we do that again using our wildcard pivot. And that gives us our data starting to look a lot more like tall and thin rather than short and wide, so it's easier to kind of work with for us. So we do a little bit of cleaning up of our question field. So if you can see here that we've got a lot of spaces, a lot of letters, a lot of punctuation that we don't want. We just want to have the numbers. So to clean that up, I'm just going into clean, I'm removing letters, I'm removing punctuation, and I'm removing all the spaces, and then making that a numeric field. And we're just doing a little bit more like cleaning up and renaming in this step so that that's all nice and clean for us now. So now we're going to separate these two streams out again where we had our correct answers and our participants' answers. So that's literally by just, clicking on the table name, the correct answers table name, and saying keep only these values. And similarly for the participants, doing the opposite. and just renaming this field to be called correct answers rather than answers, and removing a couple more fields because they're not necessary to us. And similarly, we're just filtering and removing some fields here, so that when we now join these together, we will have our answers and correct answers as two columns next to each other, and that will allow us to check if our answers are right, basically. So we're joining on the round number and the question, getting rid of unnecessary fields, so that then we come out and we have this sort of data set. So we create a calculator field to calculate the points, where we're saying if the answers are equal to the correct answers, then give us 1, otherwise give us a 0, and that will allow us to sum up and get to our right answers. So if we want to calculate those overall points, first of all, then we use a fixed LOD, and we're grouping it by the name and summing up those points so that we get sort of these 5 distinct values for each player. And we rename that as total score, and then we rank this total score. We do a dense rank, and just that gives us our numbers 1 to 5. So then we just rename that to position, remove a couple of fields that we don't now need the detail about question numbers or the answers, because we're now ready to just pivot this to be in the correct shape for the desired output, where we then have these round numbers as our headings again, and we have our position name and total score as well. So we just pivot that by a round number, sum those points up, and then we have our sort of 6 rows of data to finish off this challenge. So hopefully that was useful, and thanks for listening.